In this podcast, I would like to talk about the Cold War, one of the most important and complex periods of 20th century. I chose this topic because it is a key moment in modern history that shaped international politics after World War II, and it continues to influence global relations today. The Cold War was not a direct military conflict between the United States and the Soviet Union, but it was rather a long period of ideological, political, economic, and military tension between the two superpowers. It lasted roughly from 1947 to 1991, and it did influence almost every region of the world. To understand the Cold War, we need to start with the end of World War II in 1945. The defeat of Nazi Germany left two dominant powers in the world, the United States and the Soviet Union. Although they had been allies during the war against Hitler, their relationship wasn't built on trust, it was built on necessity. The United States, led by President Harry S. Truman, supported capitalism and democratic governments, while the Soviet Union, led by Joseph Stalin, promoted communism and one party rule. Both sides wanted to expand their influence, and this ideological difference quickly turned into a global tension. A key turning point was 1947 when the Truman Doctrine was announced. Truman declared that the United States would support countries threatened by communism. This policy was first employed in Greece and in Turkey. In the same period, the Marshall Plan was introduced, providing billions of dollars in economic aid to rebuild Western Europe. The goal was not only humanitarian, but it was also strategic to prevent the spread of communism by stabilizing economies. In response, the Soviet Union tightened control over Eastern Europe, creating communist governments in countries such as Poland, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and Romania. This division of Europe became known as the Iron Curtain, a term popularized by Winston Churchill in 1946. By 1949, tensions had clearly escalated. The Soviet Union successfully tested its first atomic bomb, ending the American monopoly on nuclear weapons. In the same year, NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was created, a military alliance led by the United States and Western European countries. In response, the Soviet Union later formed the Warsaw Pact in 1955, uniting Eastern Bloc countries under Soviet military control. The world was now divided into two opposing camps. One of the earliest major crises of Cold War was the Berlin blockade in 1948 and ending in 1949. Stalin attempted to cut off access to West Berlin, which was controlled by the Western Allies. In response, the United States and its allies organized the Berlin Airlift, supplying the city with food and fuel by air for almost a year. The blockade failed, but it did confirm the deep division of Germany and Europe, which later became symbolized by the Berlin Wall, built in 1961 under East German leader Walter Ulbricht, supported by Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev. The 1950s also saw the outbreak of the Korean War. North Korea, supported by the Soviet Union and China under Mao Zedong, invaded South Korea, which was backed by the United States and United Nations forces. The world ended in 1953 with an armistice, not a peace treaty, leaving Korea divided along the 38th parallel. This conflict showed that Cold War tensions could lead to real, large-scale wars in other regions of the world. Another major phase of the Cold War was the nuclear arms race. Both superpowers rapidly increased their nuclear arsenals. In 1952, the United States tested the hydrogen bomb, followed by the Soviet Union in 1953. The concept of mutually assured destruction developed, meaning that a nuclear war would destroy both sides equally and completely. The 1960s marked some of the most dangerous moments of the Cold War. In 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world closest to nuclear war ever. After the Cuban Revolution, led by Fidel Castro, Cuba had aligned with the Soviet Union. In 1962, American intelligence discovered Soviet nuclear missiles installed in Cuba, just 1,050 kilometers from Florida. President John F. Kennedy demanded their removal, while Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev initially refused. For 13 days, the world was on the brink of nuclear war. Eventually, a deal was reached. The Soviet Union removed the missiles, and the United States secretly agreed to remove its missiles from Turkey. At the same time, the Cold War extended into space. The space race began after the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1 in 1957, the first artificial satellite. In 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space. The United States responded with the Apollo program led by NASA. In 1969, during the Apollo 11 mission, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first humans to walk on the moon. This event was a major symbolic victory for the United States. The Cold War also involved numerous proxy wars. In Vietnam, conflict escalated after the division of the country in 1954, following the defeat of French colonial forces. North Vietnam, led by Ho Chi Minh and supported by Soviet Union and China, fought against South Vietnam, supported by the United States. The Vietnam War lasted from mid-1960s to 1975, and it ended with the fall of Saigon and the unification of Vietnam under communist control. It was a major political and social defeat for the United States. In the 1970s, tensions temporarily eased during a period known as the Détente. Leaders such as Richard Nixon in the United States and Leonid Brezhnev in the Soviet Union signed arms limitation agreements like SALT I in 1972. However, this relaxation did not last long. In 1979, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan renewed tensions. The United States, under President Jimmy Carter and later Ronald Reagan, supported Afghan resistance fighters known as the Mujahideen. The final phase of the Cold War began in the 1980s. The Soviet Union faced serious economic problems and political instability. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev became leader of the USSR and introduced reforms known as Glasnost, which means openness, and Perestroika, which means restructuring. These reforms unintentionally weakened Soviet control over Eastern Europe. In 1989, communist governments collapsed across Eastern Europe and the Berlin Wall fell on November 9, 1989. Finally, in 1991, the Soviet Union officially dissolved, marking the end of the Cold War. In conclusion, the Cold War was a global conflict shaped by ideology, power, and fear. It began after World War II with the division of Europe, escalated through crises like Korea, Cuba, and Vietnam, and it ended with the collapse of the Soviet Union. Key figures included Truman, Stalin, Khrushchev, Kennedy, Nixon, Reagan, and Gorbachev. Although it never became a direct world war, its impact was global and long-lasting. Even today, international politics, military alliances, and nuclear strategies are still influenced by the decisions that were made during the Cold War era.